Imagine going into retirement as a single person with a large portion of your portfolio in pre-tax accounts. You want to implement the right tax strategy to save money, but you don't want to make a mistake that could end up costing you tens of thousands of dollars. That's the exact situation Laura finds herself in. Tune in as she shares her fears about making the wrong tax move early in retirement, and watch as we walk through several different tax considerations to optimize everything she's worked for. Joining me for today's retirement makeover is Laura. Laura, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So you retired May of 2023.
Yes.
You are retired now.
Yes.
What is your greatest concern or fear when it comes to retirement planning?
Well, I have been grappling with tax planning. I have a big 401k. That was such a great idea when I started, but now that I'm here and retired, that's going to generate a big tax bill when I get older. And I want to convert that, but at the same time, I'm under Medicare age, so I need to buy health insurance on the marketplace. And if I do that conversion, I get no subsidy. And I'm not sure what's the best way to move forward with that at this point.
Yeah. So last year when you retired, May of 23, did you do anything with Roth Conversions last year or with any planning around health insurance subsidies? What did you or didn't you do last year?
So last year was a missed opportunity. I was thinking about it and I didn't 100% understand all the ins and outs. And so I wanted to study it rather than make a mistake. And I do believe that the optimum would be to do some sort of conversion. I'm not sure how much. And I think I missed an opportunity last year. Since I retired, I've been on Cobra. That was a good decision. And mostly I've been just trying to find health plans and conversion amounts that set me up correctly.
Yeah. What is the biggest fee? Because I think sometimes people think of conversions and they see the savings, but what they don't realize is it really hurts up front. It really means you're paying a big check. Is that a fear? Is that something that causes some analysis paralysis for you as you look at it?
Yes, it's anxiety provoking because there's some things I want to do in my life, right? With my time, it would be nice to do some trips and do some work on my house, and that's a big bill. And the health insurance is a big bill, and then the taxes on any conversion I do is a big bill. And to spend all that money right away after I've retired, before I see if my plan is working, right? As I live, I'll have more confidence in my planning, but to spend it all in the first couple of years is a little scary.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It can be. And I want people to fully appreciate what Laura just said, because yes, we know it can be such a good thing, but it is a bill. And when you think about the things that you want to do, typically paying taxes isn't the top of the list of things you're most excited to spend money on up front. So how can you do that without sacrificing quality of life, without sacrificing some of the trips you want to do or the experiences you want to create? And I like what you said of you need to see if your plan is working first. The tax strategy should never be the first thing. It should never be, okay, well, how much should I convert first and foremost? It's, am I on track to be okay? Am I on track to make this work? What's my withdrawal plan? So we're going to go through your plan, high level first, Laura, of just, are you going to be okay as a foundation, as a starting point? You've done well. You've saved well. You've grown your portfolio. That is now leading some challenges of, I know that I'm going to pay the piper at some point when it comes to taxes coming out of this. So we're going to see, are you on track? Are you okay? And then based upon that, what strategic tax moves can you make going forward? So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Do you have anything else you want to add in terms of challenges with retirement, or does that pretty well summarize?
That summarizes it.
Okay. As we go through this, we're going to start, like I said, with, are you on track, and then tax strategy. And there's a few nuances to that, because taxes can be federal taxes, taxes can be state taxes, taxes can be IRMA surcharges, taxes can be thought of as health insurance subsidies or lack of subsidy. Taxes can be part of estate planning, estate taxes. It can be taxes your beneficiaries pay. So there's so many angles we need to explore. But we're going to start by looking at this. So here's a breakdown, Laura, of where you are today. You have done well. You've saved well. A lot of these savings are in pre-tax accounts. So yes, you have your brokerage accounts here at Fidelity. You have your 401k, which is about 1.4 million. You have a pre-tax IRA, about 720,000 or so. You have your Roth IRA. So this is after tax. That will grow tax-free, but it's a smaller part of your overall portfolio, of course. And then you have some various other accounts. And the question is primarily around, what do we do with these guys? What do we do with this 2.1, 2.2-ish million dollars or so? What do we do with that, knowing that you're not at required minimum distribution age today? If you didn't do anything with this, they would continue to grow and could be a challenge in the future. So that is where you are. The goals that you have, you want to retire. Now, you did this last year. So you're 60 years old now. You've been retired for a little bit over a year. You want to spend $3,500 per month throughout retirement. Now, that's core expenses. And I want to make sure people realize that. That's not $3,500 to cover everything. That's after property taxes, after home maintenance, after home insurance, after all these other costs. Does Laura then have $3,500 per month for groceries, to go see a movie if you want, to go do some other things just to live comfortably there? How far does that go, Laura? Does that allow you to do everything you want to do, or do you feel as if you are sacrificing it all?
Yeah, I'm comfortable.
Great. So $3,500 per month is good. Travel or fund money. So this is an additional $6,000 per year. What does that look like for you? What are you spending that $6,000 on?
Well, I like to go north to see my family, or I might take a trip just by myself for some fun. So 1 or 2 bigger trips a year. I like to do hiking and can't, so my trips aren't expensive. I'm not, doing super fun. I could do 2 trips on 6,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is mainly cost of transportation and then some incidentals while you are there for the most part. Great. Health insurance costs. This is somewhat of an estimate, but you have $21,000 per year before Medicare. After Medicare, there's just the Part B and Part D premiums. Then we're assuming an out-of-pocket cost. That $21,000 seems fairly high, but is that based upon what you are currently paying, or what's that number based on?
No, that is assuming no subsidy in the ACA marketplace, which I won't have if I do a Roth conversion. So an ACA plan will be for a 60-year-old person, $1,000 to $1,100 a month. And then if I have some expenses out of pocket on top of that, it's going to easily add up to $20,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. And you're including your out-of-pocket costs as well, in addition to the premium.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Then you've got some other expenses that aren't going to happen every single year, but some one-off things that do cost a bit more that we want to plan for, whether it's a wedding gift, whether it's home repairs. So I think do you mind sharing what you shared prior to? You would love to maybe do them more now, but what's your concern?
Yeah, so I have a lot of deferred maintenance on my house. I was renting it out and I need to fix it up. And so I budgeted in actually 5 years, but we moved it to 10 wouldn't that be nice? And it's in my plan and it looks fine, but it would be nice to do it all at once. Although it's, again, anxiety provoking to spend all that money in the first year of retirement when I haven't yet seen how my plan is working.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I'm going to reiterate that again. As Laura is 60, there's some income coming in. There's a survivor benefit because Social Security, you can collect that as soon as age 60. But you don't have your Social Security benefit yet. You don't have your pension yet, which we're going to cover. There's investments, but it's kind of scary to think I'm already pulling money to cover these expenses. I'm already pulling money to maybe do a Roth conversion. I'm already pulling money to do some other things, to sink a lot more or to pull out a lot more to renovate the house. Seems scary, especially the early years of retirement when you don't know, to your point, is my plan working? Am I getting the growth needed to make this happen? So we're going to explore that. Then there's some other things here, whether it's a car goal. So every so often need to purchase a new car. So that's a number that's budgeted in. Annual retirement long-term care costs. This is just a nursing home national average, $116,000. We're assuming last 4 years of life. What if you need that, just to make sure that there's some money being reserved for that in case it happens, so that we're not caught off guard, of course, later on. So those are your goals. Income that you have, you're retired, so salary has gone away. You will have your Social Security benefit that you collect at age 70. Until then, you have a survivor benefit. Your spouse, your deceased spouse passed in 1998. Is that correct, Laura?
Yes.
Okay. So you have a survivor benefit coming in. This ties into tax planning. And I'm going to hint ahead a little bit of you're going to have a different tax bracket if you're filing single than you would married filing jointly. And so a lot of this, if you are currently married, as you do think about tax planning, don't just think about, well, what, for the both of us, but what happens when one of you passes before the other. That's something that needs to be taken into account because tax brackets will essentially be cut in half. So more on that later, but Social Security benefit coming in, you'll have a pension from your husband's pension. So that will be a little bit coming in starting next year, I believe you said, 2026. And then Laura, your pension, you'll have about $27,000 per year coming in. That won't start until age 67 though. So income coming in, but of these income sources, only a small amount, a relatively small amount is today, more of them coming in the future, which means they're not yet generating income for you. With this, we have a snapshot of where are you today, Laura, in terms of investments that you have, property, et cetera. What are your goals? What income sources do you have to meet all of those? Now, before we go into tax strategy, we want to start working through cash flows. This is where I always start with this. This is where we measure, are you going to be okay? Do you have the income needed coming in to support what you want to do? And broadly speaking, we're going to separate out your retirement into cash inflows and cash outflows. So inflows being what income sources do you have coming in that are going to help you pay the bills before we factor in any investment income. So for example, Social Security is an income source that you have today. Today, you are collecting a survivor benefit. In the future, you will be collecting your own benefit. So you can see here's your survivor benefit, and here's how that changes when your own benefit kicks in. Strategy being your own benefit continues to increase every year that you don't collect, and then it's a much higher benefit at age 70. That's one income source. Another income source is pensions. So you have pension from your late husband starting next year, starting 2026, I should say. You have your pension starting at your age 67. And so income coming in, but again, the larger amounts aren't starting immediately. They're pushed out a little bit. Another income source, this says plan distributions. This is modeling out, you have your health savings account that it gets spent now for medical expenses. That's a conversation. Does that make sense to use that now, or does it make sense to defer it?
I would have planned to let that grow tax-free as long as I don't need the money. So,
yeah, I think so as well. So after I can tweak this a little bit and show you what that looks like, it won't make a major difference in the grand scheme of things because it's a smaller amount of your overall portfolio, but not truly income as much as just a withdrawal from a designated account for health expenses. But what we're looking at is we say, well, here's your total income sources in this column here, starting at about 47,000. Then it drops once the health savings account gets spent down in this projection. Obviously, we can tweak that. Income stays relatively consistent until your pension kicks in and then bumps up again once Social Security kicks in. But what we need to compare that to is what are your expenses going to be? Income's a good place to start, but your income isn't what your lifestyle is based on. Your lifestyle is based on the expenses that we're defining here. These expenses are core living expenses. This is the $3,500 per month. So $3,500, a lot of times when I go through this on YouTube, people say, well, there's no way you can cover property taxes and insurances and travel. This isn't designed to cover all those. This is just what Laura wants to live on after all of that is said and done. So on top of that, we still have housing, property taxes, insurance or HOA, home maintenance, additional expenses. So you can see what that expense does. Healthcare, here's that healthcare expense increasing over time, and then it drops a little bit once Medicare kicks in. And so you have that instead of the marketplace plan that we're looking at here. And then goals. Goals are things that aren't happening every single year, but we're defining them for some period of time. So it could be a car every 10 years, like you have defined here. Could be additional travel that you maybe aren't taking forever, but at least have it planned through to 75 to say, I want to take hikes and take these trips for the foreseeable future. Could be one-time things like supporting wedding, things like that. Property. So this is where you mentioned, Laura, that you have some deferred maintenance and you want to make sure that you can do these repairs. There's some fears of doing those all up front because that's a big bill to cover, not knowing what's going to come in the markets and all that might be with retirement. So spreading that out a little bit. But when we add those in, those are additional goals. And then finally, we have tax payment. Tax payment here is the projected taxes that you would pay. Now, mind you, this is before doing anything like a Roth conversion or anything else like that. This is projected taxes that you would need to pay based upon the income sources you have or the projected withdrawals that you're taking. So net flows here. This is answering the question of, Laura, how much do you need to take out of your portfolio so that you can pay taxes, cover these goals, property, wedding, vacation, car, and then end up with enough to pay for your healthcare, pay for housing, and then have $3,500 per month or $42,000 per year left over to cover your expenses. So this is where we want to start. This is how we start to answer the question of, are you going to be okay? These numbers, it's all relative. For some people, these look extremely high. For some people, these look extremely low. What I care about is not that. I care about, how do these compare to Laura's portfolio? Your portfolio is the tool that you have to create these net flows, to create these withdrawals. And so what we really care about is, what do those numbers represent as a percentage of your overall portfolio? And we can define that by looking at this here. Those dollar amounts that you're taking out year by year represent a 1.8% withdrawal rate, 1.9, 2.1. You see, they fluctuate a little bit the first few years, then they actually start to drop. They don't drop because all of a sudden, Laura, you're spending less money. They're dropping because Social Security is kicking in. Your pension is kicking in. The more income you have from those outside sources, the less you have to pull from your portfolio. And this goes back to your point of, this is maybe where you might feel a little bit more comfortable spending more on home improvement, spending more on travel, whatever it might be, just because you know that you've got other core income sources coming in. And then this jump here is just because you turned 75, and this is before we do any Roth conversion planning. You're going to be required to start taking money out of your portfolio. But even then, it never really increases beyond 2%, which is a very, very sustainable, using history as our guide and kind of normal withdrawal rates or sustainable withdrawal rates, a very sustainable amount to take. So this doesn't address the tax question, but it does address that we were talking about just even before going live of, it's hard to retire and go from saving, and all of a sudden to say, well, now I'm going to start pulling money out. If we look at this purely logically and unemotionally, you could afford to take more out. We can't look at things purely unemotionally because it can still be challenging. So this being said, Laura, you're in a really strong position to be able to cover your needs over the next 30, 40 plus years. What we want to do now is not just say, well, great, based upon everything that you've done, here's what your portfolio is projected to do. Here it is today. Even as you draw 1% to 2% per year, your portfolio is going to, on average, continue growing, simply because 1% to 2%, if you're growing even by 5%, 6%, 7%, there's still compounding happening. It's compounding happening on a pretty large amount. So that is what it is. Now what we want to focus on is, well, what about the tax side of things? Because if I go back to cash flows, if we don't do anything, this plan distribution column is going to be zeros for a long time. Plan distributions, read that as required distributions. When you turn 75, here's what that's projected to be. And that number is not going to decrease. That number is going to continue to, and it sounds absurd, but as you look at what your portfolio could grow to with returns over time, that's not going to be a fun year to pay taxes when you have a 7-figure distribution from your portfolio. And so the goal is to say, does it make sense to pull some of that out today, put it into my Roth? Pull is the wrong word. Convert some of that today from a traditional IRA or 401k into a Roth at a lower tax rate, relatively speaking, than where I'll be when you have these major 6-figure distributions coming out. Any questions on that so far? Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. I'm surprised that the percent withdrawal is so low all through my life. I would have expected it to be bigger at some point.
What number did you have in mind that you thought it might look like?
I thought when you started doing RMDs that it grew quite high. Like since you have to take your life expectancy and divide that by however many years are left. So I thought it would be in the double digits in those RMD years. I'm
glad you brought that up because you're exactly right. In some years, it takes a while to get to double digits. It starts in the high threes. But you're looking at this and saying, well, it's never in the high threes. This is the withdrawal rate on your overall portfolio. Keep in mind, some of your portfolio is Roth.
Oh, I understand.
Some of your portfolio is brokerage.
Yes.
So that's the reason here. You could, if half of your portfolio is pre-tax and you have a required 4% withdrawal from there, that represents 2% of the overall portfolio.
Understood.
Yeah. So here's where the strategy starts coming into play as we start to look at this and we start to say, what tax brackets are you projected to be in? And before we even go there, this is something that I wanted to highlight as well of the difference between tax brackets if you are married, filing jointly, your tax status, or single. Your husband passed several years ago, and obviously that's not a tax challenge. That's way more than that. But for people planning for retirement, one of the things I really want them to be mindful of is don't just look at what your retirement looks like when you're both here and both spending. Look at what would this look like if something happened to one of us? Because, for example, what if you want to spend, I'll use $90,000 per year.
Mhm.
Well, if you're married, filing jointly, and now let's just say $90,000 of taxable income. So taxable income is your adjusted gross income, generally speaking, minus any deduction that you have. That would put you in the 12% tax bracket here if you're married, filing jointly. If you are single, $90,000 per year is already putting you closer to the top of the 22% tax bracket. That's before even taking into account or after taking into account how the standard deduction changes if you're single versus married, filing jointly. So as we're looking at that, this is really important for people to know, just because when we go back here, the tax brackets are the same in terms of it still are the 10%, the 12%, the 22%, but the thresholds that you have to cross to hit the higher tax brackets, for the most part, get cut in half. So as we're looking at this, if you did nothing today, Laura, you could potentially be in a pretty low tax bracket. You could live on your brokerage account. You could live on your HSA account. You could stay in a pretty low tax bracket until pension kicks in, Social Security kicks in, and then you turn 75, and all of a sudden you're forced to start to take out high six-figure accounts from your portfolio. Now, keep in mind, inflation's happened over this time, so the tax brackets, hopefully, the dollar amount to reach the next threshold are adjusting upwards with inflation, but still, you might be in a much higher tax bracket. This is showing what will become the 24 or become the 28% tax bracket in the future. You're in a much higher tax bracket in your mid 90s than you are here. And my guess is you're probably not spending nearly as much on travel, on fun, on lifestyle stuff in your mid 90s as you are right here. The challenge is the required nature of some of these distributions. So what we want to look at is we want to say, well, does it start to make sense to fill up some of these tax brackets? Does it make sense to fill up, let's say, the 12% tax bracket? And say, and what that means is any year that your taxable income is underneath the 12% threshold, convert just enough from your traditional accounts into your Roth accounts. And that alone would save about $250,000 of taxes. When I say save, to be very clear about that, that doesn't mean you end up with $250,000 more dollars. It means the tax adjusted value of your portfolio increases by that. And the analogy I'll use is if you have $1 million in an IRA versus $1 million in a Roth IRA, technically you haven't increased your net worth at all, but you've significantly increased the after tax, the tax adjusted value of your net worth, because one of those things is completely tax free, whereas the other is totally taxable. So it starts making a little bit of a dent. At the 22% bracket, what you start to see is you start to see a 7-figure difference in terms of the adjusted value of your portfolio. And to show what that looks like, here's what your taxable income looks like. So this purple is showing your projected taxable income amounts, and then we overlay that with the various tax brackets that you might be in at that time. The green is how would your taxable income change if you were to do conversions, and typically it's going to look like it flattens it. If this is what it looks like at first, it's going to flatten it so that you're paying more taxes on more amounts underneath certain key thresholds, and you start to have a pretty significant savings here. Did you have a number in mind though, Laura, as you were looking at your strategy? Did you have a tax bracket or a dollar amount that you were thinking you would convert to?
Yeah, I thought that I would be in 22% tax bracket this year. And so I was debating, but just over the border of it, right? I would just be in. And so I was debating whether I need to fill the 22 or even go up to the 24% bracket, because I think, it depends on how long I live, but if I live a long time, I'm way high at the end of my life. So, yeah, 22 or 24.
22 or 24. Let's explore 24. Now, one of the short, if we just look at this, this is making the assumption you either convert up to the 22% forever or up to the 24% bracket forever. If we increase this to the 24% tax bracket, it's better than doing nothing, but it's worse than if you just stopped at the 22% bracket.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, here's the thing though. Here's taxable income before. So if you don't do any conversions, this is base case scenario. Here's what that looks like if you do. And so what you see, it kind of flips it. You overpay a lot. And then you see here in the back end, if we get rid of this, in the back end, you're never, you're below the 22% bracket after age 75 and beyond. What makes more sense, more often than this was more, we get really nitty gritty, not just looking at the high level view, is for the next couple of years, we know that tax brackets are lower than where they're likely to be. Meaning the next couple of years, it probably does make a lot of sense to say, let's convert up to the 24% tax bracket. But when the 22% bracket becomes a 25% tax bracket, once current tax law sunsets, assuming it does sunset, that might be the point at which you say, okay, now do we dial it back to the 22% bracket, which is now the 25% bracket. So this should be designed to almost be like that 30,000 foot view, the map of where do we think we're going to be, where are we now, and what are some strategic decisions we can make, but never has to be an all or nothing proposition. And in your case, it looks like taking full advantage of the 24% bracket up front and then maybe dialing that back to 22 might make a lot of sense. Talk to me, Laura, how concerned are you about other types of taxes, IRMA surcharges, health insurance subsidies, things like that?
A lot. So early in my life, I started investing, and in my brokerage account, I had an asset allocation that included some bonds, and I thought it was very wise to buy some munis, and that position has gotten large. And so this is what I'm living off of with my Social Security. And but it drives my modified AGI very high. And so that's great when it comes time for paying federal taxes, but when it comes time for paying for health insurance, whether it's on the marketplace or later when I'm in Medicare, it's going to drive my health costs very high. And like you said earlier, that's just another tax. So yes, I'm quite concerned about that. And then when I do go, this is going to go to my family, and I'm aware that there are better and worse ways to structure your assets for passing along to other people. I'm sure I'm not optimized, and I think that a lot of the value could erode when I pass it to the next generation.
That's an excellent, and I really like that you're thinking about these things. Not that the dollar amount that you pass on to the next generation should ever be the primary goal, but it should be taken into consideration. If that's of value, if that's something that's meaningful to you, I want to show why I think that that's really important to consider here. If I go back to what does this look like if you convert up to the 22% bracket forever? I think you could do better if you get a little bit more strategic and dialed in year by year of maybe for the next couple of years, you convert up to the 24%, maybe beyond that, you dial it down. One assumption that has to be made here when we're looking at what's a tax adjusted ending balance is what tax rate to apply to that final ending balance. We're applying a 20%, what we're called terminal tax rate. It's almost like a way of estimating, well, whoever inherits this, what would their tax bracket be to truly define the value? Or not even who inherits it, but Laura, what if you're still living at this point? What would your tax bracket at that point continue to be to continue to pull money out? Look at what happens to this number if we change this. Let's assume that half of this was going to a charity that doesn't pay any taxes on your IRA when you give it to them, and the other half is going to children who maybe are in a relatively low income tax bracket. Let's call it 15% combined. The value of this starts to go down a little bit because it's less and less valuable to have that money in Roth. Now, it's still high, but it goes down a little bit. Versus what if hey, I know my children, they're going to be really high income tax brackets. And if they inherit a $4 million traditional IRA and they're forced to distribute that over the next 10 years, that's going to be taxed the highest bracket. Let's just say even 50%. Now, all of a sudden, this proposed strategy is even more valuable simply because it's incorporating the terminal tax bracket of other heirs into this as well. That's one part of the equation. The other part is estate taxes. Now, for a lot of people, estate taxes aren't going to be too big of a concern, especially because currently the estate tax exemption amount is quite high. Most people aren't going to have an estate large enough to be subject to it. But for those that do, 40% of your estate is taxed over the estate tax exemption amount. So if you look at this, if you did nothing, Laura, and all these projections end up being exactly right, there's a $17.7 million tax and fee here in your estate. So here's your net worth when you pass. Now it's easy to look at this and say, oh, that's a good problem to have. You have a $60 million net worth, 17, 18 million. However, if there's some strategic planning that can shift this to people that you care about or charities that you care about or things that you care about, as opposed to just, well, whatever, there's an $18 million check I'm writing to the IRS, it probably really makes sense to pay attention to that, especially if those things can have quite a significant impact. So I say this just because when people think of taxes and Roth conversions, we're typically always thinking federal taxes. We cannot neglect IRMA surcharges, health insurance subsidies, estate taxes, future generations taxes. There's all these things that come into play when determining what that looks like for you. So with that being said, does anything come to, as you look at this, between IRMA, federal taxes, estate taxes, is one a bigger priority for you to mitigate than the other?
Well, looking at these numbers, the estate tax that's a surprise to me in this conversation, and that's something that I've missed. If you know where I started in life, that's just a surreal picture that you showed me. So, yeah.
You want to know the simplest way to address that is here. So here's your portfolio today. Here's the projection at age 100. Now there's so much that's going to happen between now and then, but under these assumptions, the simplest way, Laura, is what can we do more of today? Can you double what you're spending today? Because you know what that does? That double is going to mean less money at the end of the day to be subject to estates. Now, spending could mean, hey, if you want to leave a bunch of money to family, can you do more today to help with home down payments, to help fund grandchildren's college, to help, I'm just making stuff up, to fund whatever you want. If this money is going to a charity that you care about, can you do more today to leave money to that charity? If you have home projects that you want to do for the next 10 years, but you're spreading it out because of concern, maybe you spread it out a little bit, but maybe a little bit less so, because it'd be really great to have the environment that you live in, AKA your home, be as perfect as it could be the first few years of retirement. So some strategies don't have to be super complicated estate and gifting. It can just be, can we enhance quality of life? And in doing so, it also is mitigating the need to do significant estate planning.
Yeah. When you put it that way, yes. I mean, it would be, why not give it early as opposed to giving it later? I mean, just my background, what I come from was save, be frugal, live your life. And then whatever's left over is a bonus, but it may not be the wisest way to go at this point. Maybe do some planning to have those dollars go to things where I want them to be spent, as opposed to just going to government taxes. Something to think about.
I think that's the takeaway. Is the first question is, what should I do from a tax strategy standpoint? Well, right off the bat, converting up to the 22/24% tax bracket, it has the potential to save you a whole heck of a lot of money throughout your retirement. The follow-up, my homework for you, Laura, would be to think about, what do you actually want life to live? Set aside taxes, set aside what's good for my portfolio, set aside what's good for asset allocate, whatever it is. What's good for Laura? What does Laura want to do? How do you start tailoring your portfolio for that? And that just might solve some of these tax questions that you have at the same time. So that is it as we start to wrap today's episode. Laura, thank you very much for being a guest on the Retirement Makeover. Really appreciate your time being here.
Thank you so much.
Root Financial has not provided any compensation for and has not influenced the content of any testimonials and endorsements shown. Any testimonials and endorsements shown have been invited, have been shared with each individual's permission, and are not necessarily representative of the experience of other clients. To our knowledge, no other conflicts of interest exist regarding these testimonials and endorsements. Once again, I'm James Knoll, founder of Root Financial. And if you're interested in seeing how we help our clients at Root Financial get the most out of life with their money, be sure to visit us at www.rootfinancialpartners.com.